Hello, I'm Jamie Johnson, and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm the commentator for local government and politics, and today we have as a guest Daryl Standafer, who's been a guest on our show previously. Daryl, welcome back to the show.
Good to see you, Jamie.
As most of you know, Daryl Standafer is the county board chair in St. Croix County and has been on the county board since 1996? 94, and has represented North Hudson, but then became the county board chair in 2008?
Right. No, 2010.
2010, okay. Well, anyway, today's issue that we want to talk about is an issue that goes well beyond local politics, and although it impacts St. Croix County quite a bit, and that is the St. Croix County, or the St. Croix River Bridge project. And there's been a lot of definitions with that term, but what I want to talk about is your recent trip to Washington, D.C. with 19 or 20 other people that comprised the delegation to speak to congressmen and senators regarding the bill that's pending, why we have a bill pending in Congress, and let's go back to maybe some of the history. I came to the community in 1990, and I've heard people talk about the St. Croix River Bridge since I've been here, and they've said how back in the 50s was the first talk of replacing the lift bridge, which every spring ends up getting closed because of high water and then backs up traffic in Hudson and so forth. And over the last 20-some years that I've been around anyway, has been under repair, and they're talking about it needs to be replaced, and the need is getting more urgent every year. So why don't you give us a little bit of history now about the bridge project and how we get to where we are today.
That's a big request.
We'll break it down. Let's go, because we know that
I think we'll take it in bites.
All right. First of all, the primary obstacle to the St. Croix River Bridge is claimed to be the Wild and Scenic River Act of 1972. Prior to that, St. Croix River did not have that designation. Right. It was granted that designation in 72. I suppose in theory, if there had been a project on the books and ready to build prior to that, it probably would have gotten grandfathered in. But there was no project designed and ready to build, shovel ready, if you will, at that point in 1972. But why don't you fill us in what had happened up to 72 and then into the 80s?
Sure. It's interesting you mentioned the bridge being closed when there's high water. I think most of us have experienced that, but you're also aware, and I think most of the commuters in this area painfully aware, that there are other times when the bridge is closed, either for some modest maintenance and repair or for more serious projects. Next year will be one of them. MnDOT is projecting that the bridge may be closed for a period of up to 2 months for some significant repair and renovation. Recently, because of the condition of the bridge, additional weight restrictions have been placed on the bridge, further limiting some of the traffic that would normally pass through that corridor. I live in the village of North Hudson, as you said, and I can tell you that when that bridge is closed down, either for high water or maintenance or other repair, traffic through North Hudson and Hudson is almost bumper to bumper. It's just intolerable, and it really illustrates why we need a new bridge. You're correct. It was back sometime in the 50s. There's debate over the actual year, but obviously that's a long time ago.
Right.
I was young once, and back in the 50s, I was still in high school. So back when I was in high school, people were talking about replacing what was already then deemed to be an aging lift bridge that was inadequate to carry the traffic that was going across it. Well, now we're 50 years down the road from that period of time, and we're still debating replacing now what is a fracture critical bridge. Desperately needs replacing. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is the one that has come up that most people attach to. But I think even before that, people were looking at the fact that building a new bridge costs money. Where would it go? Would it go in the existing location? The lift bridge was sort of this iconic structure for the river valley, and particularly Stillwater, that had it as an identification, and there was great debate over replacing the bridge, removing it and replacing it, or preserving it in some fashion and having a different bridge. So all of those things got mixed into the history.
Okay. And so for years, there was this debate about price and whether it was even needed. Meanwhile, we continue to experience growth in western Wisconsin and throughout the suburbs of the Twin Cities. And the Twin Cities, until recently anyway, was always doing better than the rest of the country economically, growing at a great pace, and contributed to the great growth we had in the 90s. And I think that kind of brought this project to the forefront as far as to a point where they actually come up with money to design the bridge and then go through the permitting process. Mm-hmm. But just to even back up in a little more elemental description, because we have folks from Eau Claire and Madison viewing this, mm-hmm. and they're going to be wondering, well, why would you want to disturb a national wild and scenic river with a bridge, and is it really necessary? I think you need to also describe what we have going on both sides of the river as far as how the traffic goes and where this lift bridge is located in proximity to the downtown area of Stillwater.
Exactly. I think maybe it should also be pointed out that those of us who have for a number of years been advocating for the bridge live here. So we certainly do not want to do anything that would jeopardize or impair the river. In fact, I think we're river protectors in the truest sense of the word. The project that we're trying to advance right now, which in fact does need a congressional exemption from the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and we'll probably come back to that. The project that we are advancing, which came through the federally mandated multi-year mediation process, would significantly reduce air pollution in downtown Stillwater, which is a major problem on hot, humid summer afternoons. It would significantly reduce by over 20% phosphorus runoff into the river. By the way, the river and the bridge and the approaches are designed. So the new bridge would significantly enhance the quality, the environmental quality of the area. But to your point of the Wild and Scenic Rivers area, for those that are not familiar with where the bridge project would in fact go, it would enter Minnesota on the Minnesota Bluff line between an existing electrical utility plant on the south side and a water treatment plant on the north side. So it is a long way from what someone might normally think of as a wild and pristine, undeveloped river. It's a wild and scenic river that is going through a major metropolitan area. And right now, the obsolete fracture critical lift bridge is an impediment to the traffic that crosses that river every day.
Right, and I don't know the traffic counts, and I'm not sure whether you have those, but
in excess of 18,000 cars a day.
18,000 cars a day go over that lift bridge.
Right, and the lift bridge was designed for 10.
Okay. We have, on the Minnesota side, it's basically 4 lanes, 2 lanes in each direction, going right up to that point, and then they merge together, which causes some more congestion.
Absolutely.
And I know this, if anybody that's wanted to see
traffic accidents, which we have to investigate and cost us money. And so
it funnels down into the downtown of Stillwater,
right,
and goes probably almost a mile to get to the turn, right, to the bridge itself. And then, of course, you have to wait because it is a lift bridge. It's only, I don't know what the height is, 20 feet.
Right, to permit boat traffic.
Right. And so that has to go up and down, and that causes further backups. Anyone trying to get to Stillwater on the day that they have 4th of July fireworks, right, you can just plan on an extra hour of traffic. Exactly. So it causes a big backup. But now, I think we have a drawing that maybe our producers can put up and describing the project, and shows a mock-up of what it would look like. It would give you
the visual impact from the Wisconsin Bluff line of what the proposed project would look like as it enters and joins up with Minnesota 36 in Washington County.
Okay, and hopefully our viewers are able to see that. Now, this bridge design came forward when then, in relation to time-wise? Are we talking the 90s?
Yeah, this was early in this decade, when, as a result of the process, and I sort of dropped this in and reminded Representative Halsey when he was tweaking some of us about this being a boondoggle. I reminded him that in 2002, this process came about as a presidential executive order, and it created the environmental streamlining process that was that mediation process. It required top-level federal, state, and local officials to complete environmental and regulatory reviews, and that multi-year process, there were 27 stakeholders involved in that process. 26 of the 27 at the end of it signed off on this project and said, we agree that's the project that should go forward.
Without naming all 27, just give us examples of who would be a stakeholder of the 27 that participate in this federal mediation process.
Oh goodness, it was the 2 states, it was the 2 counties, St. Joe, town of St. Joe, city of Stillwater. I don't remember all of them. Sure. All of the interested parties, city of Oak Park Heights.
So all these political subdivisions and municipalities would have some kind of representation.
And organizations and groups that had an interest.
And out of the 20, you said 26 of 27 approved it. Who was the one lone dissenter to this design project?
At the end of the process, the Sierra Club, who was part of the participation the entire time, did not sign off on it.
Okay. And there were, I imagine, during that federal multi-year process of federal mediation, there were different designs that, well, how about this? And how about, would that be better?
That's exactly what the process was. It was everybody coming to one final, agreed upon, everybody could buy into that project.
And cost was a factor for some, and the environmental aspects,
all of that,
so forth.
all of it.
And so then when they went forward then with that, that's when the permitting went into place?
Well, that's when the permitting started. In other words, can this be in fact done? The Sierra Club at that point filed some lawsuits that further delayed the project, and then ultimately the National Park Service ruled that unless there was a congressional exemption from the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, no bridge could be built. And I would stress their statements said no bridge, not this bridge, no bridge.
Okay. So there was a little reversal from the National Park Service, though. Originally they had issued a ruling saying that this would not be violative of the Wild Scenic River Act, and then it got struck down by a judge, and then they reevaluated the process.
And I would point out that when Congress did in fact put in place the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act approximately 40 years ago, in that original legislation there was envisioned the possibility that some future time an exemption may need to be granted for a project. That if you were going to have wild and scenic areas that you wanted people to be able to get to and visit, there was always the possibility that a congressional exemption to permit development in a wild and scenic rivers area was foreseen. And there have been a couple that have been granted. So this sets no precedent, and it's a very narrow request simply to permit this project in that location to be built.
So that was a year ago, almost this week, that the National Park Service had made that veto, but with the proviso that there be a congressional exemption. And now, 1 year later, we're finally to the point where there's a bill introduced in each, the Senate and the House of Representatives, one by Michelle Bachmann and one by Amy Klobuchar, with many co-sponsors and co-authors and so forth. So you went with almost 2 dozen.
And that's why our delegation was in Washington.
Okay, yeah, and that's what I was going to say. This delegation comprised yourself, your counterpart on Washington County side, and many other organizations, all who are in favor of moving forward with this bridge and trying to get this exemption. So let's talk a little bit about that. What do you need in order for this to be approved, this exemption?
Well, we need the agreement of the Congress, the House and Senate, and signature by the President. The interesting thing is, and this is not my analysis, frankly, this is Senator Klobuchar's analysis. The interesting thing is that right now there is a bit of a confrontational environment in the Capitol. I think that's not a surprise to everyone.
That's probably an understatement.
And because of that environment, and because of the fact that this is a bipartisan opportunity, and the legislation that is being advanced right now with the full support of the Minnesota and Wisconsin affected parties, in other words, the senators from all the senators from both states, the Congress people from both sides of the river whose district this is, and the adjacent Congress people from both sides of the river north of this project, all of them are signed on this bill, Republicans and Democrats. So in the House, you've got Republican Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann in Minnesota and Democrat Congressman Ron Kind in Wisconsin. You've got Republican and Democrat senators all signed on it. And Senator Klobuchar made an interesting observation. She said, here is an opportunity on a bipartisan basis for this to move through the Congress, and that is the approach that she's taking. And I think that she's astute in doing it in that manner.
Okay, so when people joke about it takes an act of Congress to get something done,
This
literally
really
in
will.
this case,
Literally, there will be no bridge without an act of Congress.
But this was not a delegation going to seek money. In tough times, it would be tough to do that with Congress, is to get any money wrung out of the federal budget. But this was not about money. Money's already reserved for this.
Yep.
And so it was just a matter of getting the approval. So what does it take to, now that the bill's been introduced, and I saw just today a press release went out about Michelle Bachmann's bill getting a markup. What does that mean?
That means that there will be a hearing Wednesday in committee. And in committee, when it's in markup, legislation can be debated, it can be amended, it can be modified. As a matter of fact, the bill that Congresswoman Bachmann originally dropped into the House hopper, which is H.R. 850, the language in that bill is being modified to be identical to the language that Senator Klobuchar has in the Senate. And that's with the full support of Congresswoman Bachmann. Both offices said that neither one has any pride of authorship. What they're trying to do is get the most agreeable language with the narrow request for the congressional exemption for this project. And so the two bills will wind up being identical.
As long as they're identical, then what that avoids is after they've been passed by each House.
It wouldn't need to go to any kind of a conference committee.
Right, it wouldn't need a conference.
Identical.
Yeah. And in this case, it's key that you have a member of the majority party in each of those respective bodies promoting this.
Again, part of the strategy.
Now, okay, so trying to put yourself in the seat of somebody from Wyoming or Oregon, I'll take a more environmentally left state like Oregon or Washington maybe. What would convince a congressman there or a senator there that we need to get this bill passed?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's not our job to do that. And I'm not trying at all to pass the buck. Our job, and by our, I mean the Coalition for the River Crossing and the delegation that was there, was to work with and to continue to work with our two delegations. And they have said from the beginning it's their job to convince their colleagues that this is an important piece of legislation. And I think...
Well, so then how did you do that? How did this delegation go to talk to the congressional people? How did that go?
Right. Well, it went very well. It was very positive. We had a full day of back-to-back scheduled opportunities to meet in the various offices. In some cases, we met with the members of Congress themselves. In some cases, we met with the staffs. I can tell you that in most cases that may be more productive because the staffs wind up doing the work anyway. I worked for a congressman, early in my career, and the staffs wind up doing the work anyway. They're the ones that you want to be knowledgeable, and that was very, very positive. It's ironic. I just received today, as a matter of fact, and this is dated the 26th of September. I guess this is why it's called snail mail.
Okay.
But I received it today. I received a letter just today from Senator Cole, and I briefly just quote a couple of things from it because I think it illustrates this point. I had talked to him about a month ago when he was in Hudson, and he spoke at the Rotary Club. And in fact, I think you and I sat beside each other, as I recall that day.
We did.
And he just simply says, thank you for your, it's addressed to me as county board chair. It says, thank you for your comments last month when we visited at the Hudson Rotary, and more recently for coming to D.C. to add support for the bridge project. I appreciated hearing from my legislative assistant, Chris Heckling, about your recent meeting on the Stillwater Lift Bridge. That kind of illustrates my point because we did meet with Chris, who's very knowledgeable and is working this issue. You in particular have an important role and interest when it comes to this discussion. But now here comes, I think, the heart of what we're talking about in terms of this project. And I continue again to quote from Senator Cole. As you know, the current bridge is more than 80 years old and is in serious disrepair. Structural problems and maintenance needs have risen dramatically, and the regional population has increased significantly. That means more cars and more idling in traffic and causing higher tailpipe emissions whenever the bridge is lifting or under repair. With your county being one of the fastest growing places in Wisconsin, that development necessitates investment on a similar scale. We clearly need infrastructure that is safe and reflects the needs of the community. I just might pause there and say, he didn't need to sell me.
Right.
I knew that part.
Yeah.
But then he goes on and again, on the bipartisan nature. All 4 senators from Wisconsin and Minnesota are united in support of this project. I'll underscore that. He says, all 4 senators are united in support of this project. I am a co-sponsor of Senator Amy Klobuchar's bill, that's Senate 1134, it's the companion to H.R. 850 in the House, that would move this project forward, and I have been joined in that effort by Senators John, he means Johnson, and Franken.
Okay.
Recently, we wrote a letter to the Energy and Natural Resources Chairman, Senator Jeff Bingham, asking him to bring this bill for a vote as soon as possible. As I mentioned during my visit at the Hudson Rotary, and my legislative assistant, Chris Heckling, likely reiterated during your meeting, moving this bill through committee is not going to be an easy task, but please be assured that we endeavor my office will continue to work with you and provide you with updates. So I don't know how he could have been any clearer that he's in support of the project. It's a critical project, it's a bipartisan project, and he's working on it.
That's great. Well, which leads me to the next. Obviously, senators and congressmen who are not from this area, if we've got the support of the ones who are directly involved by this project, that's, I think, step one. But what do you need to do to convince the others? And I guess it gets back to congressmen like to follow the will of the people. So how do we, can the voters here, can constituents here affect that by sending letters of support? And
well, I'll take that in 2 steps, and I'll take the last part first. The answer is yes. And frankly, probably not letters. Emails are much preferable. Since the anthrax scare several years ago, it takes a long time to get pieces of paper to a congressional desk, and it has to get irradiated and, as they call it, fried, and it's
Okay.
it's just a bad process. So send an email to House members or senators, and particularly ours, because what they pointed out, if they can clearly demonstrate to their colleagues, and again I underscore, they told us that's their job. If they can underscore to their colleagues that yes, this has significant and broad-based public support, in other words, like our coalition, which crossed all kinds of constituency lines, if that is part of the process, and if it's clearly a project that is supported by the representatives, the senators and members of the House from the area on a bipartisan basis, as this is, then it's hard for someone else to go against it, because this is clearly a major and desirable multi-state infrastructure situation. The Twin Cities metropolitan area is a major metropolitan area, and a project like this that is a significant resource to continue the economic viability of this area is seen by other members of Congress not as a parochial project, but part of a national picture. And this is why all along we have been careful not to call this the Stillwater Bridge, because it's not a Stillwater Bridge. It's a major interstate bridge between Wisconsin and Minnesota that will carry significant traffic in that corridor. I might point out that some people have indicated, well, why can't traffic simply go down and go across the Hudson Bridge? Why does it need a new bridge here 8 miles away? Current planners and highway engineers point out that that corridor, which is now being called the Gateway Corridor, and there are organizations that are working as far as that trafficway is concerned, that corridor is going to be maxed out someplace in the range of 2019 to 2020. So to take the traffic that is already maxed out the Stillwater Bridge, in fact it's approximately double what that bridge is ever designed to handle, and say the solution is to send it down to a corridor that within a relatively short period of time is going to be maxed out, would just be ludicrous on the face of it.
Okay. Well, regarding that process, you had some stories when we were off camera and you were telling, and I thought that was interesting. I think our viewers would appreciate the process for, maybe some people are into history like I am and, saw movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and so forth. How does, even though, you've been involved in local government for quite some time, how do you get to an audience with important senators and congressmen and get significant chunks of their day when they're conducting other business and they're very busy people?
You mentioned Mr. Smith. It's kind of comical actually, because as I was getting ready to go to Washington, one of my Facebook friends posted a comment about the trip coming up, and they said, "You go, Mr. Smith." So, right. I think you have to be of a certain age to even understand what that reference is. That's an old movie, but I guess you and I both get it. The response that we had there, as I indicated, was very good. And we tried to be very clear that we were there to be of assistance to their offices. That are there things that we can do to assist them as they're moving forward their legislation? And one of the things that people can in fact do would be to join the coalition. We do have a website and a coalition, and it's the Coalition for the New River Crossing, LLC. There are a number of Facebook pages that have sprung up even independent of our work. I am aware of 3 or 4 that are quite active, and they're all, they post the things from everybody else. So that tells us that there is a broad-based constituency out there that wants a new bridge. If there's one factor that probably is more negative than anything else right now, and we're aware of that, it's that there's a certain amount of, some of us are calling it bridge fatigue. Right. As you indicated earlier, the first discussion to replace the obsolete lift bridge was back in the 50s. I started working on this project in the early 90s when I first came on the county board, and as a matter of fact, in I believe it was 1996, I was part of a delegation that went to DC for this same request, the same reason to replace the lift bridge. Now that was prior to the stakeholder process, it was prior to the federally mandated review, so it was back when we were simply saying we need to move forward with planning and design for a new bridge. And what is the permitting process, and how do we go through that? I showed Noah earlier a picture from that delegation. I'm so young in there, I've still got hair, It's a picture with Congressman Ron Kind. He looks like he's about 14 years old.
Right.
It just indicates that a lot of us have been involved in this for a long period of time. So from the public standpoint, there's a certain skepticism that this is ever going to get done. They say, yes, we need a new bridge, but it'll never happen in my lifetime, those kinds of things. Well, I'm here to say today it frankly looks like we're as close as we've ever been. It looks very possible that we will get the authorization that we need in both the House and the Senate this fall. That would be an excellent thing. If that is the case, then MnDOT, who's the lead agency, would be able to move forward with the plans that they've already got in the hopper. The money is set aside. The governor of Minnesota says, he just needs to know that it's good so that MnDOT can move ahead, and construction would start then in early 2014. Early 2014.
Now, you had mentioned Frankly, and which reminded me that Senator Franken was...
Senator Franken, yes.
Yes, and yes. So I thought to sum up this process and to sum up where we're at on the bridge, you thought that he had a great summary.
Oh, I really did. In fact, I would be willing to say publicly that he changed my impression of him a little bit. I guess most people that know me would know that he probably would not be one of my drinking buddies. I guess I'm a little bit partisan, and I say that in the best sense of the word. But Senator Franken that day was conducting, as was involved in the same committee, Senators Cole and Senator Klobuchar.
Okay.
Ironically, they were all involved in the Google hearings 2 weeks ago, and some of your viewers may remember that. It was televised on C-SPAN and CNN, and so to meet with them, our delegation met with them in a conference room right off from the hearing room, which was in the Dirksen building. And so when they would get a break from their questioning, they would come out and meet with us. So the door would open, and here's these guys with the spotlights on them, testifying in front of the committee, getting grilled by the committee, and the senators come out and meet with us. But at the end of the discussion that we had with Senator Franken, and to his credit, he took longer than any of the other senators to decide his position, and I respect him for that. He probably has a natural constituency that would be pressing him not to do this, but he looked at it very carefully and finally came to the conclusion that this is, in his words, a major economic development and infrastructure project for the Twin Cities metropolitan area between two states, and he needed to be on board with it. But he summed up his conversation with us, which I thought was well done. He summed it up with what I also thought was probably the most succinct statement that we heard the whole time we were in D.C. And finally he looked around the room at our delegation, and we were packed in around a little conference table, and he was sitting there with us, and he said, a new bridge needs to be built. This is the only bridge that's going to be built, so let's get it done. At that point, we all agreed. I mean, that's why we were there, to request the authorization to build that bridge.
Great. And with that, I think we'll wrap up today. Did you have any more to add to this issue? I think we've talked to folks and let them know that how they can get involved, and you said joining the coalition and sending emails. Anything else?
All important. Talk to friends and neighbors. Those that express, as I said, bridge fatigue, disabuse them of that notion. It looks like this bridge is in fact going to happen, which would be the culmination of a lot of years of work by a lot of people, and would be a major improvement for the environmental quality, the traffic safety, and the economic viability of the St. Croix River Valley.
Great. Well, with that, we'll also knock on wood with that statement. And I want to thank our viewers for joining us. Thank you, Daryl,
Jamie,
for
thank you.
Explaining this. And we'll keep in touch on this, and hopefully we can have a follow-up interview talking about the scheduling of that first shovel where you can wear the hard hat.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
That would be great. Well, thank you again for joining us for another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal.